Welcome to Digital After Dark with your hosts, Matt and Andrew.
So for mine, it was from chaos to clarity, streamlining data with JSON schemas. Now, one thing that you're going to realize is I did not put this on a Loop Horizon template because I was no longer representing Loop Horizon when presenting this. I was representing myself because I'm doing this on Saturday. I'm still an employee of Loop Horizon, but Loop Horizon had nothing to do with this, so I could talk about this from my own perspective.
Absolutely.
So I start off with just asking people, how accurate is your digital data? And is your time spent wisely? So let's think about it. One, are you seeing unexpected values, such as having number two come up before number one? Um, are there multiple format variations of the same value? I remember at Sky, one of the things that my old manager talked about was in the backend system, there were at least 8 different ways for Sky 1 to be recorded.
Did you get a laugh for that, by the way?
No, because it was, unexpected that I didn't have number 1 coming up first. So I decided to just play it off on this one.
That's fantastic. You should have totally done that. That's amazing. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
I'm not normally that quick on my feet.
That's such a good joke, though. We desperately need to use that in future. That's amazing. Get number 2 to come up first.
Especially when I
Are you getting unexpected values? Number 2.
Dear viewers and listeners, I will admit I have never seen Matt laugh so hard, especially with something I did, well, that was an actual complete error on the site.
It's fucking brilliant.
But was there any unexpected data for the event, such as unexpected, I nearly killed Matt from laughing, or spit out his beer? Um, Data missing, or does the business trust the data, or did you accidentally have two come up instead of just one like you meant? And are you spending more time debugging the data than you're actually using the data? So some of the benefits that one of our clients had with the data schema that we provided was they talked about how the developers in the QA have a quick way to validate new events to match the specification while performing the regression testing. This reduced the amount of back and forth between the developer and the analyst during the development stage because it's mostly eliminated. The developer can see, is the event coming up correctly matching with their schema? They are receiving fewer emails that are just saying, does this look right? Yes, it's right. It's already been checked and validated. There's less need to validate data layer on screen sharing to visually compare against specifications because let's be honest, how many times are you spending time just going on a screen share? Okay, now let me go through the QA and show you how it's working. Does this look right? Does this look right? And you're being put on the spot and you're trying to check this data layer. And some of these data layers could be huge. QA developers are informed the event is right or not, including which event and what went wrong without additional training. So that's what's great. They're literally given a compass saying, there's the problem right there. And there is no additional training they need. It just happens right there in their dev console. Improves efficiency and data accuracy by removing human error. Because like I said, these data layers could be quite huge. You may just accidentally miss, oh, that number was in a string. It should have not been in a string. Analysts focuses on technical specification and validation of the event. Developers QA and ObservePoint performs the checks. So once again, without additional training or software, you're empowering these people to be more confident on what they're doing. And just a pat on my own back. I love this one part that they talked about. It was you really have to take your hat off to the Loop Horizon team for what they've built here. We've got ongoing validation of all of our specifications, and we add in new validations whenever we come up with a new specification, or more likely, extend an existing one. The Dev and QA team have a reliable way of checking that our requirements have been met, and the ObservePoint integration gives us peace of mind monitoring. And I just love that they just talked about a hat off, and this was something which they were really happy with. And we did meet them later on, and they did talk about how much they are really getting great value out of having this. But I do want to talk off real quick. This is not sponsored by ObservePoint, but if you do want to, call me. So the topics that I want to talk about is just understanding what is a JSON schema and its role in the data layer validation, some new features I have learned and leveraged this year. Then how do we implement JSON schema validation in a tag management system and then leverage JSON schema validation in an automated monitoring platforms. So just real quick definitions. JSON schema defines the structure of the JSON data to ensure consistent formatting across data layers. And that's the thing. All data layers are in more of a JSON format. Data constraints, it specifies exactly what type of data is supposed to be in there. What's the value? And it validates it against these conditions that we have put in. And one other thing I love is a standardized description. So it provides a standardized way to describe JSON data formats, improving interpretability. Then validating the data layer schema with JSON schema. You have the data type validation. So JSON schema verifies that the data types matches what was the expected format. So preventing data mismatches, like I mentioned. Is it a string? Is it a number? You have what is required. So you could tell it. This one is actually required to actually be part of the data layer for each of these conditions. One of the things that you can also do is also say what is not required in there. And then finally, value constraints checking. So just schema enforces value constraints, ensuring the data integrity and consistency across the implementation. So you could be as strict as you want. You can define multiple things. You can say it needs to be at least this long, or it cannot exceed this long, or it cannot have these type of characters in there. So you can really go into great detail of what to expect. So however strict that you want to make it is down to you. So the benefits of the developers, they have error detection and a data dictionary out of this. So they get an early warning. Is there an issue? They don't have to wait till it's in development or heaven forbid if it's in a UAT environment where they have less control of being able to fix this. They can see visually right there it's done and it saves analyst time as these validations were already completed beforehand. It's also a living dictionary. If you take the time to fill this out properly, you can say this is exactly where the data is coming from. You can provide examples. The data layer schema or the JSON schema gives you a lot of opportunities to provide as much information as you want. And now you can hand it over. Let's be honest, there's a lot more of them than there are of us. So you need to make this as clear as possible because most likely you will get someone new and they can use this to be able to help them out in doing it. So it's almost like you help me help you. So
So
that's what
that's
this is
a
doing.
lot more developers than implementation specialists, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like a job introduction spec to data quality.
Not just that, but it's also telling them how and where these things are coming from because we get so many questions. Well, where do I pull this from? Well, if you take the time, if the analyst took the time to fill this in, they would know exactly where it goes because they've already worked with all the people to figure out how this data can get pulled. And ultimately, this will improve data quality because you're trying to catch these things before it gets put into production. As long as they don't actually turn off the feature flag to stop this, it will just keep running. And there are ways of actually forcing it to keep it on. So what types can you validate against? Well, you can validate string, number, integers, objects, arrays, boolean, null. So there are plenty on there. And I'm using draft 7. And so far, I have not come across a scenario that I could not meet with it so far. This ensures that there's data conformity. So I was working with one of our clients and I could see in one journey where at one point value is a number. On the very next screen, value is a string. Is it going to be a huge issue? Maybe, maybe not. But is one of the things that you start wondering, well, if these things are already a mismatch, what other things are mismatch? Now you can utilize constraints using minimum, maximum, pattern required. And patterns one of those things where I never came across before. But for starters, numeric limits, you can set a minimum and maximum constraint. So you can say, well, it needs to be a minimum of this or a maximum of this. So like I've always thought having a minimum of 0 for quantity doesn't make sense because if you are using the GA4 one, if quantity is 0, they've never actually added to the basket, which means they need to have that data in there. You can also use multiple of to show how it should be incremented by. So you can say it needs to increment by 1 or it needs to increment by 0.01 if you're using currency. Pattern enforcement. So pattern constraints enforces specific string formats to ensure data consistency and correctness. So you could also add a not pattern to show what it should not match. I'm thinking of something else. So patterns what I didn't know about. So this is where you can use regex to actually show it. Or you could say, here are the exact values that you may want, but there's better ways of doing it than through pattern.
I like the not element of this because you can get it to ensure that it doesn't match PII, for example. So it will throw an error if you've put an email address in.
Yeah. One of the things that I did for a client was they wanted to make sure that they were accidentally putting in HTML attributes in. So we put in to make sure that that wasn't being done. And the mandatory field, it required ensure essential fields are always present within the data layer. But something which I learned after presenting this is that you can say what is not mandatory. So there's a way of doing the reverse logic on that one. So you actually prevent something from being put on which shouldn't be there.
And that really helps with having something like a single schema for e-commerce objects for GA4, for example,
Mhm.
where you can say that if something is a purchase, a mandatory field is transaction ID, but you can flip that on its head and say that if something is a viewed product, then transaction ID shouldn't be there. And so you can test for both scenarios, whether somebody's added transaction ID where it shouldn't be and vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah. And you could also throw a error to say, well, you put transaction ID on, but this isn't a purchase. That's an error.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yep. The cost parameter usage. So the cost parameter enforces exact value matching, enhancing data validation precision. So this is where it's really useful to say what exactly things are you looking for. So is it that you're setting for a cost of page view because this is being a check for a page view? Contains parameter functionality. It does a check for presence of values within an array or a string. So this is where you can actually say, well, I want to make sure that this value is contained. So on this one above, you can see on the left, it says contains role of an admin. So it's checking everything in there to make sure that somewhere in that array, an admin is actually defined. And this is one which I didn't know, pattern match on format. So using the format enables the ability to check if the format is in the known pattern. So some common ones that they have is date, time, email. So you don't have to write down regex. You can say, check to make sure that this matches in the email format. So here's just a further example where we had this, where I said, well, the email address is a type of a string. The format is an email, but I strictly stated that the pattern must match only loop horizon emails. Would you ever use this in GA4 or anything? No, but this just gave an example of what you could be doing. And then at the bottom, we have the all of. So it says that for this one, all of these must match. So it must contain a role of an admin and it must contain a role of an owner. Now, one of the things that we know that with GA4, they don't like empty strings. They much prefer unspecified. Just the word unspecified, not in the string, but just unspecified. And this is one of the first times I actually got Max.
Or undefined, you mean?
Oh, sorry, undefined. Sorry.
Cool. Sorry.
Did I actually put unspecified? Ah, I messed up. Nobody called me out on that one. Um, but it was strange because you don't have one where any of the types that would match for this. So that's when I actually said one of these had to be true. It either needed to be a string or it needed to not be a string. So that way you can then allow them to pass in the correct value or pass in undefined. That way it worked correctly. So it's kind of strange that you have this reverse logic like that. And if you are talking about, you're on mute. I had to move you over, so I can't see if you're mute or
Sorry.
not.
Um, no, interesting because basically you're saying it has to be a string or it has to be undefined, but it can't be like an integer. It can't be. So it's a good catch-all. I think it'd be interesting to say, is there any way of defining that it has to be a string and the length has to be greater than 0 or
Yes.
minus 1? Because that would be interesting. So it has to be a string. It has to be, and then I guess within the type of string, so it'd be one of type equals string and length is greater than 0, or it has to not be a string, because then that would deal with empty strings as well. You could say it can't be an integer, it can't be a number, it can't be an object, it can't blah blah blah, it can't be an array. It has to be a string or it has to be undefined. But
Yeah.
if it's not a string, you get where I'm going with it.
Yeah. So I could put one of type string, comma, max, min length 1. So if I did put min length on here, that would actually cause an issue because undefined would not be a min length of 1 because it's not a string, and min length is only for strings.
Could you nest it within the type equals string though?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. I could have done in part of the curly brackets of type string, I could have said type colon string, comma, min length, colon 1.
And then you could say, or it's something that's not a string. I guess if you're saying that it's not a type of string, it's not a type equals string, could that not then include something like an integer by accident?
No,
So would you not need to say,
because I also have pattern down there.
"Oh,
So
yes,
if
of
it
course you
did
do.
have it
Of
on
course
there.
you do." Yeah, okay. No, makes sense.
Mhm. Now, one of the things I always had fun was looking at how we can actually have something required. Because if you think about the GA4 data layer, you have event, which will say what type of event it is. So add payment info. Then you'll have e-commerce. And then within that e-commerce, you have items. And inside the items, you're going to have multiple things. But how do you make something required based off of the event being add payment info? And essentially, you have to set the required at the event level. So you have to set it at the event, not at the items. So here's where we do the nested one, where we say, well, we're looking for event in e-commerce. And then, so if the property event of any of one of these event types, then make the properties of the e-commerce required checkout journey and the properties of items, which is an array, which items is part of this definition, make required from that item name, item ID, price, item brand, and you could go in detail. And we've done this where we literally have so many things nested. We're like, well, here's one for purchase and here's one for view item. And then you could just group them all together.
What I like about this, and there is no way of making this clear within any kind of presentation, so it's not a criticism. But what I like about this is the event level definition. Then for things that need to appear in every single event of this particular categorization on the actual items object or the event object or whatever, like the nested object, the separate file that deals with those, you have the required items that are required for everything.
Mhm.
And then the conditionally required items you deal with at the point that you decide the event, which I like. So it's like you've got the information off here. This is this object here, this thing that I've got in my hand is going to be required for every event. And so we're always going to grab it. We're always going to pull this back in, whatever the event is. And then as we pull it back in, we're going to merge it with the other stuff that's required. But the other stuff that's required is going to be required on a unique event by event basis. So it will, the object the required object will be altered and changed and appended to and merged on an event by event basis. And what's lovely about that is that you only have to define the standard objects that are required in every event once. You don't have to define them everywhere, which is neat and appeals to me on a very deep emotional level.
It's one of those things where you're trying to make it as standard as possible, but there's certain events where you can't make it standard, and that's why you need to do this nested if. So integrating the JSON schema into your tag manager solution. So while I haven't done it for GTM yet, which since then I now know how to do it with GTM. But this is a real-time data layer validation. So validation occurs at real time during the tag execution. So the data integrity is on a page by page basis. So one of the things I would recommend, don't ever release this to production. Should be for development only. But inside Adobe Launch, we literally did everything in one rule. So within the JSON schema validation library, you load it. In the JSON schema, you set the validation to have an instance made, and you tell it what is your data layer schema that you want to do. And from there, you go ahead and set it up to start doing the validation. One of the things I like to do is I like to set the data layer schema within a data element. That way, you're not accidentally deleting some of your code. So it's kind of gives that a little bit more of a security. Now, I decided not to give the portion of the code that does all the validation checks because that's kind of our little thing. I know that, Matt, you did give away a lot more of it in yours. So we could talk about that one later. But whenever you do set the element, make sure that you return it as an object. So you're going to have to make sure you do a return and then put everything as an object. Now, just some of the things with Adobe Launch, you can create a property just for the data layer validation. So you can literally have another property where all you're loading is your data layer validation because you don't want to check your rules are working or not. All you want to check is the data layer, and that's all you need. So load only the JSON schema validation. Then you could add the validation into your development environment, or you can go ahead and manipulate it by changing which property is being loaded. One of the things you can do is just say satellite environment stage and set which one you want to run on. That way, if you do happen to release this in your main one, well, you're still safe. Now, personally with me, I like to do schema version control. So copy, but whenever you're going to make changes to it, copy it, start with the new version. So that way, if you do make a mistake, you have the old version that you can always go back to that you know was working fine. You need thorough testing on this. Make a small change, test it. Make another small change, test it. Because if you do make a big bang change, then it's a lot harder to find out where did you make the errors. I did that before, and I literally spent an entire day just trying to figure out where is my error. Avoid complex schemas. Keep the schema as simple as possible, but you just have to decide where you want to pick your battles because the more complex you make it, the harder it's going to is to enforce it or even to get this to work correctly. And really understand how the data is populated. Work with your developers. Really just ask yourself, is it even feasible for this to be done? Now you can use ObservePoint with this. So you can have continuous data layer auditing. ObservePoint allows you to scan at scale. It saves you time so you're not the one that's going through doing it. And they have a JavaScript switch one. So you can literally say, stop your Adobe launch one in production, load this new property one, which has the data layer schema, so that way it can do the validation check there. So it's essentially creating a health dashboard just for your data layer. Now to do this, you need reverse logic. So if you think about it, ObservePoint is telling you what is not there. This time you need to actually say, throw an error if this is there. So what you're doing is you're going to create an object. And every time that there is an error, just for ObservePoint, ObservePoint is going to look for that object. If that object exists, there's an error on the page. There you go. If that object doesn't exist, there were no errors. So that page is fine. So I absolutely love using Uno in the reverse for this one. And here is just a list of all possible variables that you could have. And for those who are listening to us, sorry, I'm not going to go through read this because it is a very extensive list, but it gives you what type of category is it, what's the keywords for it, what kind is it for, how does it apply, and a definition of usage. I would love to say that I went through and typed all this up. I didn't. We have other tools that can do this. So in conclusion, a powerful data validation. So make it as strict or as open as necessary. So you define where you want to start focusing on first. You can go MVP and just say, let's just start working on getting the type correct. So just get, is it a number? Is it just a string? It helps you improve data quality. So it takes the data validation as early in the process as possible, hopefully preventing this from ever going into production. And this enables developers to validate that there are no errors before passing it to the analytics team. So when they are passing over, go, hey, it passed your schema, just have a once over. Developers gain efficiency by having a full dictionary of exactly where this is coming from. So there's less back and forth of, well, how do I actually pull this? If the analyst did their due diligence, it's already there. And you have the ability to have automated test validation. So adding this into ObservePoint enables the team to automate test validation across the entire website scale. And you can learn more from Matt, which Matt will be actually showing very shortly. And last but not least, this is not sponsored by ObservePoint. I may have talked about a lot and what you could do with it, but still, please call me. And finally, we have to leave it with a joke. So why did the JSON schema ask so many questions?
I don't know. Why did the JSON schema?
Because it wanted to validate all the answers. So any questions? I know. It's not as funny starting with number 2. We could have done it as Jeopardy. I could give you the answer first and say, and that was the question. All right.
Very good.
Thank you. Matt, now over to you.
Interesting doing this after Andrew's presentation. So automated schema validation. I mean, Andrew's kind of talked about it already, but what you're doing is you're taking a living JSON schema that is going to deal with a complex data layer, and you're going to the schema in itself, as Andrew has alluded to, allows for real-time validation for your development team, but you want to be able to run that schema at scale. So I describe it as like a T shape. If you give a schema to your development team, exactly as Andrew has described in the previous slides, and they test that against a single journey, the one that they are building at the time, it will tell them that the data layer works or is aligned to the schema for the journey that they have built. So data layers are an integrated ecosystem. You can't change it in one place and expect that it's not going to change somewhere else. And so if you're making updates to a data layer schema, you're making updates to a data layer, the way that it's populated, the way that it fires. If you're doing that in a single location, it's going to affect other areas. So testing it against one journey, and that happens to be the journey that you're building. That's the line of the T, and then the cross. That's the bit that's missing. Is how do you then take that and apply it at scale across 1,000 pages or 10,000 pages? How do you take that and roll it out everywhere? And then, you know, how do you then automate that? So every time that the development environment updates, how do you ensure that audit gets triggered? And then how do you get alerted to if anything breaks? So we're talking about, this is a data layer. I've tried to keep it fairly anonymous, but it's pretty big. It's this particular one is a product view for a particular listing page, so a page with multiple products, and it's almost 200 kilobytes. So how do you validate that? Well, fortunately, you've got the JSON schema. Not going to spend too much time on that. Andrew's already explained what the JSON schema is for, but essentially it will tell you if you've got that sheet. You've got the sheet with the circle shape and the crescent shape and the star shape and the square shape, and you're trying to push a dodecahedron through it, and it's going to go, no, I don't want a dodecahedron. This is terrible, and it's going to throw an error. That's what your schema's for. So your data layer, this is something that I've said for a while. The definition of the data layer, what it actually is the schema. That's the definition. The objects that get pushed through the data layer are transient. They are ephemeral. They're things that you're trying to pass at that time, and an event, a specific timestamp, an event in time. They're things that you're trying to pass through. The data layer itself is the sheet. It's the sheet with the circle shape and the square shape and the and the crescent and so on. That's what the actual data layer is. That's what defines it. And so this is what it is. It's you try and push something through, and that something doesn't fit the definition, and then this is what you get. You get an output. So this is your developer thing. This is the thing that Andrew was talking about. You get an output back to the console that will tell you, as a developer in real time, this journey that I'm building, it's fine. It works from a user experience point of view, but unfortunately something I've done doesn't meet the data standards. And so it's trying to treat data quality with the same respect that we treat user experience, because ultimately data quality is the thing that will define the future user experience. So we should treat data quality with the same respect that we treat user experience. The only difference between the two is time. And it will throw a bunch of errors back, and so your development team will be able to use that. But how do you take that? So how do you take that thing that's the thin layer, testing it on this one individual journey, and how do you make sure that doesn't then break it everywhere else? Because I've seen this. We've had clients that have made data layer changes, and they've worked perfectly in the environment and in the journey that they were meant to work within, but they changed the timing, or they changed an object, or something altered that then cascaded back up, and it actually meant that the whole thing broke for the rest of the site. So that one journey worked fine, but the rest of the website, suddenly the data layer broke. So what do you do to validate that at scale, to make sure that the change you've made in this one place then doesn't break it everywhere else? And so you use ObservePoint. And again, not sponsored by ObservePoint, but the thing is everybody talks about Google, and everybody does sessions on Google, and everybody talks about Adobe and does sessions on Adobe, and people do sessions on Snowplow, and so on and so forth. But nobody does sessions on ObservePoint. So why not? Let's do a session on ObservePoint. So it's not sponsored by them, but let's talk about what the tool does and give them some credit.
One of the things that I think is really great is every time that we do the testing or people do testing, they always do it in a vacuum. So you're saying that it works in a vacuum, but once you release it, now it's no longer a vacuum. It's more open up. So now you're using ObservePoint to do the test validation to say, well, now go to the scale on this, just crawl and find what's the issues.
Puncture the vacuum. Exactly. Take it out and don't look at it in isolation. Look at it as part of your wider ecosystem, because your data layer is part of a wider ecosystem, or at least, if it's built correctly, it should be part of a wider ecosystem. The jury's out. But the idea is that what you're going to do is you're going to swap your tag manager for a version that has the schema validation. And as Andrew alluded to in his previous deck, the reason you do that is because what you're interested in is you're interested in the development level data layer, not anything that you might be doing to the data layer through a tag manager, but you're interested in what the website delivered data layer is doing, because that is ultimately the core thing that is driving data quality. Everything else cascades from that. You're going to then configure the schema errors as a tag so that they get picked up. So you're not just looking at console errors as you would if you were a person in the console digging into console errors and expanding them. You're going to create a tag that allows you to then explore that information in ObservePoint because you want something that works with the ObservePoint interface. And then you're going to set rules that tell you when stuff's broken. And then lastly, if you really feel like it and you want to go the whole hog, you're going to run a webhook so that every time a release is made to one of your development environments, these audits run and they test that release without anybody having to actually manually do it. So I'll gloss over this a little bit, but this is the Cloudflare script. It's an open source library that will test. It's a JSON schema validation library, and then you feed that your JSON schema. Andrew has already told you about what a JSON schema could look like, so I've missed that bit out. And then once you've fed this your JSON schema library, you then test events against it. And essentially what we're doing here is, and I've missed out some of this, so hopefully I haven't given too much of the IP away, but basically there's an events to validate object that will tell you which ones you're supposed to validate and which ones you're not. And then it'll pull out the data layer object, and then you pass that data layer object to this AJV validation. And then if there is an error, it will return the error, and you can assign that error to an object. That's the one that's going to get picked up by ObservePoint. And then you can also return that as a console error. The console error is the thing that your developer is going to see, and ObservePoint will see it as well. But the OP data layer schema errors object that contains the errors, that's the thing that's going to get picked up by ObservePoint as a tag, and that you can then dig into within the platform. Then, now we're getting into the ObservePoint bit. You're going to disable GTM. So Andrew said he wasn't sure how to do it in GTM. Here's how you do it in GTM. You're going to disable GTM. The key thing with this regex is it's picking up GTM, then it's picking up any version of a GTM container ID. Then it has a $sign. The $sign is absolutely key. The $sign says that the GTM tag has to end there. We're going to replace it with a development instance of GTM. So if you didn't know, so most people do GTM and they only put it in preview mode and so on, but you can actually publish to a dev version of GTM and not the live version of GTM. So you can create a new GTM container. It has the same idea as the production one, but then it has some additional script at the end of it. So what you're doing here is you're basically saying, just look for the production one, because if I didn't put that $sign at the end, it would also block and replace it with an empty JavaScript object, the development one that I'm going to deploy later. So it's basically, this won't work unless you make sure that it's only looking for the prod version. It's a nuanced point, but it's worth calling out. And then what you can do with GTM, because GTM is a JavaScript function rather than launch is just a library. You just reference a library for Adobe Launch. So with launch, you can just say, look for my production version of launch and replace it with a different version of launch. You can't do that with GTM because although you can block the network request, which is what this is doing, and it's going to not block the network request for the production version of GTM, you can't replace it just simply with a new network request that points to the dev version of GTM, because in order to point to the dev version of GTM, you have to run a JavaScript function. That's not what this is going to do. So what you do is you block the network request for your production instance of GTM and you replace it with an empty JavaScript object. So it's literally a file that ends in .js that has nothing in it. That's going to block GTM. Then you're going to apply that to your audit in ObservePoint. So you're going to say block GTM script. There you go. I've ticked it. Then what you're going to do is in the on-page actions, you're going to run some script. And so this is the thing, is because the script replacement, the file replacement thing is blocking a network request, and you can't replace it with a direct like-for-like development version network request because GTM requires you to run a function. You're not just replacing a network request, but you're having to replace an entire JavaScript function. You block the production GTM, and then you re-implement the development GTM here. And the key points with this are, what you can do here is you can have more than one domain. So you could test more than one domain at once, and you can have multiple development versions of GTM. Because that thing with the, if I just go back to it, it doesn't block a specific production GTM because it's a regex. It blocks every production GTM because that's what the $sign does. So now what you can do is you can replace the GTM script with a lookup table. This is the additional authentication that gets appended to the end of the URL, which is why you're only blocking the production version, not the dev version. And then you can have as many websites as you want, and you just replace the values dynamically by using location href. And you can see here, I've got lukehorizon.com and sometest.com. I'm getting rid of https www. I'm getting rid of https empty. I'm getting rid of www. I'm getting rid of http. I'm getting rid of forward slashes, etc., etc., etc. And then I am replacing them with the data from this object. So this section of the code here gets replaced with this, dependent on which website it is I happen to be scanning. And this section here gets replaced with this, dependent on which website I am scanning. And so you can do schema validation within a single ObservePoint audit, so long as the data-less schema is shared across multiple sites. Within a single ObservePoint audit, you can scan multiple websites just by simply using the host.
So Matt, real quick on that one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
You're using location.href. Is there any reason using that instead of location.domain?
No, not as far as I'm aware.
So location.domain may be easier just because you don't have to pull in all the path names and stuff, and that way you're just pulling back what's the actual domain.
Oh.
Okay, just
No,
curious.
no, href, location href doesn't have the path name.
I thought href pulls the entire URL, so that includes the path name and query string.
No, shouldn't do. I'll have to check. Sorry, I'm not sure.
I can be wrong. I had that 1%. And I don't like to question you.
I'll have to check. I'm not doing
Right.
it now, but I think href is the. You know, you might be right actually. Yeah, we could do location.domain.
I'll check while you're finishing off.
Yes, that would be good. That would be good. But if so, then yes, you would use domain rather than href. Otherwise, then what I've presented is fine. So essentially, then what you've got is you've got your data layer object. So this is like the order of operations, basically, and you can run it over however many pages you want. You've got your data layer object, gets pushed onto the web page. That gets picked up by your tag manager. bearing in mind this is the version of the tag manager that contains your schema validation. It's not your normal tag manager. It's the one that you've used ObservePoint to swap it out to. That then runs the schema validation. So it's got your JSON schema within it, and it's going to push that onto the schema validation and return errors. If it finds any errors, then it pushes those back onto the web page as an object or as a console error, and then they get picked up by ObservePoint. And what you end up with is these are the console errors. So you can see in this particular case, we've tested against a client or whoever, and there have been 879 pages have got a data layer error. So this is a problem. And these are the console errors. Now, the problem with console errors is in ObservePoint anyway, and this is the thing about making it work with the interface, is that you kind of have to scroll all the way over to see what's in them. It flattens them to a string. So what you do instead is you go in and you create a new data layer object. And I've got a little reciprocal GIF here that's kind of saying that. And you can tell that's the one I named it as. So I'm just typing in whatever it is, and this is a feature of ObservePoint, is you can give it any JavaScript object that you want, and you can tell it to treat that JavaScript object like a tag. And as you can see here, this is the JavaScript object that I named within the schema validation. So I'm just telling it to go treat that object like a tag. And then the fun thing that you can do there is that once you've done that, and ObservePoint has picked up the data about that tag in inverted commas, is you can now see that the schema has told you what is wrong with your data layer. And these are the pages. So you're on a specific page. You can then go and dig into it and find out what's broken. And in this case, it's that the data that was sent, the little circle shape, was trying to be passed through a square value. And so as the edges of the square got knocked off, it transpires that it should have contained an enum that was equal to one set of values, but in fact it didn't. It contained something entirely new. And so that's a problem with your data quality. And it just guides you directly to it. Then what you can do, and this is Andrew's point around setting rules for things that exist. What I'm saying here is that if you find, and this is again in ObservePoint, if you find the tag that equals OP data schema errors, then run a validation on it. And then what I've done is I've made sure that the validation will always fail. So if you find a data layer object that equals the thing that I've set, as Andrew pointed out, normally you would be checking for things that don't exist that should be there. But in this case, if the thing exists, we know it shouldn't be there because that means an error has occurred. So all we do is we just say we set it to something that will definitely break. So we say if the account equals OP data schema errors, then the account equals break. Well, the logic itself tells you that that will fail because if the thing exists, then it can't possibly equal break because it equals OP data schema errors, and therefore you get an error. And that means that over time, as you track your audit from week to week or month to month or whatever, you can track whether errors have got worse, as these ones have, or whether they've got better, because you can see the rule performance at a high level. And then the last thing is, here's your ObservePoint API. ObservePoint is completely API driven. If you wanted to create a webhook, you could give this to your development team. This is the webhook to run a particular audit. You could give them the webhook for the audit that you're interested in, and you could say to them, every time you release to UAT or to pre-production or to one of the earlier development environments, trigger this audit. And then it will mean you don't have to do this manually, or you don't have to set it on a cadence that aligns to release schedules or anything like that. You can literally, every single time it runs, it will just run the audit. Now, that has the potential to burn through your allowance because ObservePoint is charged on a number of scans basis. So be careful. when setting this up, but nonetheless, the option is there.
So something which I heard interesting was at the ObservePoint Edge. Someone from ObservePoint mentioned that you could actually use that API hook to start a countdown timer. So that way, if they are releasing multiple times throughout the day, the new one, it will start the countdown over again and then start counting down again. And so that way you have a better chance of not burning through it so quickly.
That's a really good check. Yes, I was told something similar. Absolutely. So it doesn't have to fire every time. You can say run the webhook, start the counter, exactly as Andrew said, and then within a certain amount of time, if there are no further releases, if there is another release, it resets the counter and it keeps counting. And then if there are no further releases, then it runs the audit after a given period. Or alternatively, you can do exactly what we've done here, and we've just said run it bi-weekly, because we know that the development release schedule is every 2 weeks, so we just run it aligned to the dev schedule. So there's multiple ways that you can set this up. And these were just some buzzwords, and I quite like this little circle thing. So it was automated, proactive, and efficient, just like me.
Very nice. Now, one thing just before we move on, I did say that I was going to do a real-time check. Location.href does bring the entire URL, including query strings, but I was still wrong. It's not location.domain, it's location.hostname. And that will bring back just the hostname without the HTTPS or HTTP or anything like that.
You're right. You're right. That's the one. That's the one you want. So apologies. I had miscoded. Hang on. Let's have a look at. I need to go back now and just see if I actually did do it wrong. I think it was because when I did the setup, I was only doing homepage landing pages for this particular config, and so not that I'm wanting to give myself an excuse, but I think that was what it was, because it was like it wasn't schema validation. It was like a test release kind of validation thing. So it was just home pages. But let's just go back. Yeah, location host name. There you go. Well, you learned something new. This is more one around automation. So it's talking about creating automation scripts, really. I'll try and keep it fairly short because we are 2.5 hours in. Or certainly Andrew and I have been on 2.5 hours. And we haven't, although we haven't been recording for the entire time. So I guess the first thing is like, what are we talking about? So Node.js or Python or one of those things. It allows you to host JavaScript locally. And what that means is, rather than running script in a browser, you're running it in like a little local enclosed environment, and it's really good for automation tasks, so things that are just repetitive. So like an example today, I wanted to check if a sitemap existed on 104 websites, and rather than going on 104 websites and then checking if the sitemap exists, I gave the list of 104 websites to a script in Node.js, and 30 seconds later I had my answer. So that's kind of like just an example of what an automation could look like. And then in this particular case, we're using it for automating Google Tag Manager. So Google Tag Manager is API driven, and there are many things, particularly if you've got 100 websites or 200 websites or 1,000 websites, and each of them has its own unique GTM container. There are a number of things that you might want to do repeatedly. In fact, I would argue pretty much everything you would want to do repeatedly, because you want to have a standardized deployment. So let's say NAG, and you've got websites in every single country on the planet. And you have one CDP that you want to deploy, and GTM is deployed everywhere. You don't want 500 different versions of your CDP. You want one version of it and you want it to be consistent. Or you've got a consent management platform. You don't want 500 versions of your consent management platform. You want one version of your consent management platform. And so orchestrating GTM from a central base makes a huge amount of sense. And GTM is the biggest tag manager on the planet. So, that's why we went where we went.
I was going to say real quick, just for the American listeners, he's talking about Nike.
I'm talking about Nike. No, I guess I am talking about Nike because that's the correct pronunciation for the Greek god. But anyway,
Who knows?
so there is an API for managing GTM. You can manage tags, triggers, environments, variables, users, publishing, and so on. You can read tags and you can write tags. You can publish versions and workspaces. You can change pretty much anything you want. And so the use case is you've got inconsistent common tags across your GTM containers. You want to analyze and re-implement and standardize versions of those tags. So you might already have deployed GA4, for example, everywhere, but it's done differently because somebody's done it manually across every one of your sites. And now you want to standardize it. And so you've got hundreds of containers. And so you're going to list those out in your input containers CSV. So you're going to run a script called get tags. This is a script that I created, but other names are available, but you can call it get tags. You're going to take an input. So you're going to, that get tags script is going to take an input of a list of GTM containers. And so the thing about GTM containers is if you look at the URL and you look at what's required by the GTM API, generally it's pretty consistent. It's what is the account ID, what is the container ID, what is the workspace ID, and then within the object, within the data itself is like, what's the tag ID, what's the trigger ID. So everything is ID based. So here you're going to take an input of all of the GTM containers that you want to review, and then you're going to take an output of all the tags that are found. So at this stage, what we're going to do is we're just going to pull all of the tags from all of the containers. It sounds like a massive amount of data, but really in the grand scheme of things, it isn't. And so let's say you've got 1,000 GTM containers. I'm just making up numbers. And each of those contains 10 tags. Then you've got 10,000 tags. You're going to pull those tags down. Then what the script is going to do, it's going to iterate through all of those 10,000 tags, and it's going to filter for the one that you're interested in. So if you're only interested in the GA4 tag, it's going to go find the GA4. It's going to find the Google tag, and it's going to discount everything else. So that's the first thing. Give it the containers, pull all of the tags back, get rid of the stuff you're not interested in, filter on the stuff that you are interested in. Then what you're going to do is you're going to analyze the different variations of those tags. So I mentioned at the start that the use case might be that you've already deployed GA4, for example. You've already deployed your CDP across your 1,000 domains or whatever. And that was a manual process that you did many years ago over the course of probably about 2 or 3 years to get it done. So there are inconsistencies. So now what you're going to do is once you've filtered to the tag that you're interested in, you're going to see how many different versions of that tag there are. And so that's what this is going to do. It's going to analyze the tag. It's going to take the output that you had from your first script, the common tags, and then it's going to provide some analysis. It's going to analyze that. Then you're going to run a function. You're going to hash each of the individual archetypes. So it's taken 10,000 tags and it's condensed it into 50 versions of that tag. And then it's going to create a hash to each of those. It's going to use the unique HTML structure of those tags, or the unique parameter structure of those tags, or whatever it is that's unique about those archetypes, to go from 10,000 to 50 different versions. and it's gonna convert that into a hash. Once it's converted that into a hash, it means that you can then identify that archetype. It's going to identify which containers are associated with that particular hash. That's that one. And then it's going to identify if there's duplicate tags. It's going to identify any containers that don't contain the tag. And so basically what you're doing here is you're able to have a list of unique tag variants. So how many different versions of our CDP implementation do we have? How many different versions of our GA4 tag do we have? How many containers don't even contain our CDP? It's supposed to be universal, but is it really? Has it been deployed everywhere? How many times is our CDP duplicated? How many times is GA4 duplicated? And so on and so forth. And you're going to get a list of outputs. That's the analysis part. And you automate that as well. This isn't manual. There is a script that's going to do this for you. Then it's going to extract the archetypes, and it converts each unique tag into a standalone HTML file. So what we're doing here is we're saying, now that we've got our analysis file and we've identified our 50 archetypes, and we're going to ignore the ones that don't contain the tag that we're interested in, and we'll treat them separately. We'll go talk about them separately because the tag's missing. But now what we're going to do is we're going to take each of those individual archetypes that we found, and we're going to explode those out into an individual HTML file each. And then we're going to name the files by archetype ID, and that's going to allow us to do some sorts of manual analysis. And so that's what that looks like. So here you can see there's a bunch of scripts basically, and this is the analysis, and it's giving us different versions. So this is #1, and then there's #2 somewhere further down. It's basically this is the script that told us what the 50 different archetype versions were. In this case, it's a utils tag. So we'd rolled out a consent management platform for one of our clients, and we created a utility to engage with that consent management platform, and we'd rolled it out across 300 websites, 350. And what we had found is that as we had rolled out, there were tweaks and changes that were needed to the util. So we rolled out in tranches of sort of 50 sites. We did 50, then another 50, then another 50, then another 50. And as we rolled out, we found out that and we automated that, by the way. But as we rolled out, we found out that the util needed updating. And so by the end of the project, when we got from the first 50 to the final 350, is there were lots of different versions of the utilities tag. And so then what we needed to do, although we'd recorded this and we could probably have done this manually, is it was much easier to just go over that whole 350 sides, pull back the information about all the different versions of the utilities tag that we created, and then start to consolidate them. And so this pulled the different versions of the utilities tag. But you could do this for GA4, you could do this for your CDP, any tag that is universally deployed. And then you can see there were 16 different versions. So over the course of rolling out this utility across 350 websites, we ended up with 16 different versions of it. And that's what the analysis identified. Then what you can do is you can re-import. You can use the automation script to re-import the utility. So what we did is once we'd identified the 16 different archetypes, we collapsed those down to maybe 1 or 2 that were applicable, because actually it was an organic process as we were releasing. Even though it was automated in tranches of 50, the errors that we were finding and the nuances that we were finding was organic. So we could take that and condense it down to 1 or 2 archetypes, and then we could re-import them to make sure that this was actually standardized. And so it means that it's fully scalable because you get a consistent deployment everywhere. And that's something that's not to be sniffed at, is the ability to have a consistent deployment of your CDP, of your GA4, of your utilities, of anything that you're trying to do. and have that consistent across thousands of GTM containers is, and this could be done for launch, it could be done for anything that's API driven. ObservePoint is API driven, so we use this approach with deploying consistent monitoring scans in ObservePoint, for example. We use exactly the same approach. It gives you a consistent approach. It removes human error. So if the machine's doing it, you're getting the same deployment every single time, which gets rid of human error. It reduces manual effort, as you would assume. It gives you these audit-ready outputs. So when you're wanting to analyze the differences, you've got these outputs there, and it's extensible, so you can keep building on top of it to increase the capacity of the automation.
Thank you, Matt. I think
That was my so that was my AI generated one. So apologies. The first one was the one that I actually spent time on, and that was the one that I did that I did in half an hour on the train on the way down. So apologies, it was a little bit more all over the place just now.
now, correct me if I'm wrong. With the GTM API, there is a limit of how many requests you can make at one time.
Yes, I think originally. So and I guess this is something I hadn't touched upon. The way that it works is you set up a like a processing element in GCP, and it, that's not necessarily what runs your APIs, but it's the thing that manages the authentication of those APIs. So everything has to be authenticated via Auth2, and so every request is going via your your GCP instance. For GTM, that doesn't apply to every tool, but for GTM it applies. So you set up this GTM API processing connection basically in GCP. That's the thing that your GTM API scripts that you're running in Node.js reference. They reference it with a bearer token, and you generate the bearer token through GCP as well. So basically, you've got this GCP, it's taking a certain number of requests, all being processed through GCP. The bearer token's coming from GCP as well. And so we connected it in with Postman. So basically, you can generate the bearer token through Postman. That hits your GCP instance, returns a bearer token. You put the bearer token into the Node.js, in my case, because I'm a JavaScript guy. In Rajesh's case, it was Python because he's more comfortable with that. So you can use multiple programming languages. You don't have to. You just use Node.js, but you put the bearer token in to whichever script you're wanting to run, and then all of the APIs use your authentication service. And there is a limit. Initially, the limit is on the GTM API, it's 15 requests per minute, but you can request for it to be increased. We increased it to 60 so that we could do 1 request per second. And so then what you do is in your script is you count the number of requests that it's going to make. And once you know, you can then divide that. You can divide 60 seconds by the number. That's why we did it as 60 requests per minute, because it was nice and easy. It was a nice, easy calculation. It's just like take a minute, divide it by however many requests we're going to make with each for loop through the GTM containers, and then we know that we can run this 20 times in a minute. So we have to put a 2-second delay or a 3-second delay or a 4-second delay and so on. But yeah, a good call out. Sorry.
Yep. And then the last one is that each of these tokens that you generate for the API lasts for 1 hour. So then you could also do a validation. Can you complete everything in 1 hour, or do you need to split it up into a nice number so you can get it all through?
And that was why we did tranches of 50. I mean, there were multiple reasons for doing tranches of 50, but for this particular client, it was replacing one consent management platform with another. So there was a lot more going on than what I've just demoed. It was pulling down entire GTM containers, finding everything that was related to the previous consent management platform, ripping it out, replacing it with the new consent management platform, then adding in some utility scripts. It was hugely complicated. And I don't claim to be the one who did that. That was Rajesh, who built this monstrously complex beast. I was in a supervisory role on that one. The Node.js stuff I built myself, but the big stuff Rajesh did. And so it very much was, we can probably do about 50 containers on one bearer token. But equally, what that meant was it slowed us down a little bit, and I think that was valuable, because let's do 50, let's validate 50, and we used ObservePoint. So the thing that I showed you earlier with looking at multiple landing pages and having that script replacement, that was what we originally came up with that for. So I gave it the home pages of every single website that we'd replaced the consent management platform on. We hit the home page of each one, and we checked, is the old consent management platform gone? Is the new one there? It was all part of that validation process, and that was why we were replacing the production script with a development version of the script, because we hadn't published yet. And that was fun in and of itself, because GTM API doesn't allow you to publish to a specific environment. The GTM API, if you take a workspace, put it in a version, create a version, and publish the version, it will always publish it to live. So what we did instead was we took the GTM workspace using the Python scripting and the GTM API, put it in a version, and then I created a Power Automate script, which actually used the browser interface itself to land on each one of the GTM instances, find the version, publish the version, but only publish it to development. Don't publish it to the live. Publish it to development. That was so it was increments of automation. It was automate like this huge monstrous thing of find all of the scripts that are related to the old consent management system, replace them with the new ones, get rid of anything that shouldn't be there, bringing all the additional functionality, take that workspace and put it in a version, stop. And that's why it was like 50 50 at a time made sense, because it fit within the amount of time that the bearer token would last. But also stop, take those 50, run a Power Automate script against those 50, go into each of those GTM containers, take what's in the version and push it to development, because the GTM API won't do that. So you have to do it through the browser. But equally, I don't want to be going into 50 GTM containers manually. So create a Power Automate script that pushes that into development. Stop. Run the ObservePoint scanner that blocks every production version of GTM, and then using a lookup table replaces it across 50 websites with the development version of GTM, which we created a script to generate the development version of GTM to put that in there. So we didn't even have to build the code ourselves. We had an automation script to do that for us. Drop that into ObservePoint, run the script, validate that everything worked. The new consent management platform system was present on the development environment, and then only then, so stop, confirm, and then only then push the button to push the new consent management platform out to production. So it was an automation process, but it was very compartmentalized. It was like build it, validate it, publish it. And so the tranches of 50 was extremely helpful in that as well, because it just meant that you could do it in little blocks. Good.
And glad to see it all tied together now. Now, we are at the end. Let's just do a quick wrap up, because it is now past 11 p.m. So, Matt, do you have anything for the wrap up?
I think I am entirely spent. This is by far the longest one we've
Yes.
done.
We have, and it's gonna be fun editing this one.
I don't envy you.
Yeah. So my only one was, um, I actually took a break from listening to podcasts for a while now. I know it's really sad to say as I'm creating a podcast, but I really wanted to go back and re-listen to one of my favorite books, which is a dedication. But I finally finished that this week and gone back and finally listened to the podcast that we were on with Reed. So I don't know if you actually come back and re-listen to it.
I did, but a while ago.
Yep. So I actually have notes from that one, which I'm going to then take the opportunity to do a podcast about being on his podcast.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Just because there's a few things that I wanted to just get out. And the last thing is, I just want to reiterate again a special thanks and shout out to Keely, Charles, and Tim for the MeasureCamp London because of all of the hard work they've been doing behind the scenes and making it such a success. And looking forward to it next year.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. Well, where can you find our podcast? We're on YouTube at Digital After Dark. We're on Spotify, also Digital After Dark, and Apple Podcasts, which is once again Digital After Dark. So wherever you want to be able to consume us, we should be there. So you can watch the video one on YouTube or listen just to the audio if you really do not want to look at our faces. I know. And finally, a huge thank you to Matt for being on this nearly 3-hour recording.
Thank you.
And to the listeners who have made it this far. Hopefully, it won't be anywhere near 3 hours, but if you made it this far, you are a true dedicated Digital After Dark fan.
Or you're asleep. I think it's I've got Audible, and I have downloaded quite a few books, and the latest one I've downloaded is a book by Henry Mayhew from the early 19th century, so like 1840s, around the state of the London poor. So it's talking about like the Artful Dodger and all the stuff you would see in a Charles Dickens book, but like the actual real human interactions. But it's like 50 hours long. It's like it's an academic treatise as well as all these interesting stories. So I stick that on before I go to bed, and regrettably, I do occasionally fall asleep whilst I'm listening to it. So if you have made it this far, but you are asleep, sweet dreams, and you can always pick up where you left off in the morning.
Exactly. I was gonna say the Audible book that I was listening to, it had one chapter that was over 9 hours long. I was like, that is like the most novels.
That's when you have to get yourself on the Shakti mat and just kind of lie there and I go, "Where's my Shakti mat? Here we go. Get yourself on one of these." The acupressure mats, and then you can do the whole 9 hours in a state of zen.
Nice. But see, then you fall asleep and then you have to start it all over again.
I have fallen asleep on that. So these are like spikes that sort of dig up into your back, but literally, like you run it for 10 minutes and you forget that it's even going on. And then your whole system gets flooded with endorphins and you fall asleep. It's amazing.
Amazing. Well, Matt, thank you again. Thank you to our listeners, and we'll see you next month.
Cheers. Speak soon, everyone.
Bye.